Yeah, we need to make sure someone not to sit here.
Yeah, let's try to,
Yeah,
there we go.
it's fine.
Okay, let's do that a little bit higher, a little bit, just a little bit higher.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, that should be fine. I don't know how well you can see that. Okay, let's get started. That is recording. That is recording there. Well,
Yeah,
go off to a bad start there.
Yeah, right.
Okay, it's recording. Okay, we're on our way. I've had a question. Did some people have trouble with question 10? If you had, I know it's hard to put your hand up. I know you had some trouble with question 10, so you already told me. If you had to put up your hand, if you had trouble with it, if it was difficult. It was difficult. Okay, it was difficult. Good. Okay. So let me just talk about. It's not easy. You know, it's not easy, but it does teach us some very important things. So that's why have it as an exercise. And it's also you can start learning some important things. The first thing is you want to calculate the marginal utilities. That's the first thing. So you're going to take. That's fine. The important thing is you learn how to do this. Right? This is not a trick thing. I want you to learn how to do this. So the first thing, you're going to take the marginal utilities. So marginal utility, and that's simply the change. The marginal utility is simply the change in utility between some unit minus minus 1, some unit minus 1. So that's simply, so the marginal utility, it's 0. The marginal utility there is 12,000. The next marginal utility is 11,250. $10,500. You can just see, that's the marginal utilities. So that is the marginal utilities. That's the change. The marginal utility is the change. That's what marginal means. And I'll talk a little bit about the margin today. And I think that's part of the thing that's important here is to get you to understand what margin means in marginal. Because that's a very important part of economic analysis, is we examine what goes on at the margin, at the edge. We're generally not interested in averages, because what we say is a lot of decisions are made on the margin. And so here we're looking at how the decisions are made on the margin. Okay, so we're talking about the margin. So the marginal change, that's the change in utility. But before you have that first bottle of wine, you got 0 utility. And then boom, it shoots up to 12,000. So that means your increase in utility is 12,000. You've increased from 0 to 12,000. Then you increase to 23,250. You've increased 11,250. Then to 33,750. You've increased 10,500. And just so on. Here it's 8,250. And I had one student who pointed out I made a mistake. Thank you for that. And I did. They caught what didn't look right, and they wrote me. I appreciate when students do that, because I looked at it and I realized I did make a mistake. So I made a mistake on the chart. That should have been, and that's 75. That's 6,750. Right, that's correct. Yeah, this is the correct. I had it at 76,000. It should have been 75,000. A very perceptive student pointed that out, and I appreciate that very much. And I did correct that and got that back to you. So you have the marginal utilities. So we know what the marginal utilities are. But now the important thing is once we know the marginal utilities, and here it's 8,000, and 7,200, and 6,600. You can see that. It's the same thing. You just 8,000, 7,200, 6,600, 5,600, 4,800. 4,800, 4,000. So there's a regular decrease. And that means there's diminishing marginal utility. So we have what we have here, is we have the marginal utility increases, but at a diminishing rate. So I'm teaching you about diminishing marginal utility here. But now, what we have to remember in order to do the problem correctly now, is we have to know, well, we're getting that marginal utility. We care about the marginal utility, but we want to know, what do we get, well, how much do we have to pay for that marginal utility? How much does it cost us? That's the important point. Now that we know what our marginal utility is, if the marginal utility doesn't matter if everything's free. If it's free, it doesn't matter. The reason why it matters is because even though we get marginal utility, if it's free, we just drink until it's zero, until the marginal utility is zero. That's it. We just drink, we drink until we can't stand it anymore. That's basically, we can't take another sip of, I've had enough wine, and if we have enough money, that's what we do anyway. But the point here is that if you have a budget, what do you do? What choices do you make based on the amount of utility that you get on the margin and the cost of that additional bottle of wine or 5 beers? Okay, so then we need to know the price. The price is fixed, so it's 1,500 yen per bottle of wine. So we can calculate the marginal utilities per yen. We want to know how much happiness are we getting for each yen that we spend. That's what we want to know. Now we want to know, to solve the problem, we want to know how much happiness we're getting for each additional bottle. What's the marginal happiness we're getting? And we can measure that because we have to pull, in order to get that bottle, that bottle, you have to give something up. You have to give up 1,500 yen. That's the resources, the credit, which is money, the credit that I have to pull out of my wallet to give that up is 1,500. It's 2,000 yen. I get some change. I get a 500 yen piece, but it costs me 1,500. I have to give that up to get this bottle. So what do I get for that? I get 12,000. My marginal utility is 12,000. So 12,000 divided by 1,500. That's what I get. That's the utility, marginal utility per yen that I get is 12,000 divided by 1,500, and that is 8. I get 8 units of utility for every yen that I spend. That's the marginal utility that I'm getting. So there I'm getting 8 units. Then I'm getting here, it's 11,250. 11,250 divided by, it's the same price. Remember, the price doesn't change unless we combine a discount, but here we're assuming that it just costs the same. So we have to spend the same amount of money, and then that's what? 7.5, what is it, 7.5? That's 7.5. So 8, 7.5. You'll see it actually goes down steadily. It steadily goes down. Okay. Now, but if I only have wine and I have a budget of 15,300 yen. I had to do that because that's the way it works out. If I have 15,300 yen per month, I have a bit of money to spend, but I'm only spending it on wine. I just still spend until I'm out of money. But in this case, I have a choice. I choose. I have beer too. I can either drink beer or wine. So now what I want to find out is that there's some order that I'm going to purchase these goods during the month. Because I got my budget, 15,300. I got money in my pocket. The month is just starting, and it's the weekend. It's time to have some fun. And so what am I going to do? Well, it depends. It's 8,000. That cost me 150 yen. So that is so 5 of that is 750. So you can calculate how much marginal utility that I'm getting. Let's see, 155. That's 750. So 750 divided by 75 divided by 800, and it's what, 10? Yeah, 10, 50, 10 something. Is that right? Anyway, I think, okay. Anyway, that's what, let me go back and see those numbers. That was a little bit different than what I remembered. But there it is. But that's, so you're gonna, so you got 10 units, so each yen buys you 10 units of utility for the first 5 beers, or it buys you 8 units of utility for the first wine. So there you're gonna choose the beer. So you're gonna do the beer first. And that's, in sequence, you're gonna go down, your 5, so then your next 5 has a smaller marginal utility, because it's diminishing marginal utility. So you have more utility, but it's at a decreasing rate, downward sloping demand curve. And you want to look at the marginal utility and the yen per, the amount of utility per yen that you spend. And whichever one gives you the most utility is the one that you do. It's like you wake up and you say, how do I feel today? Yeah, I feel like having some wine. You know, and so what you're saying is that when you make that choice, your marginal utility is greater. That's what you're saying. If you have that choice, you're saying that the marginal utility that you're per yen, that you're purchasing, per yen, your marginal utility is greater. That's exactly what that means. And so what you're doing is you want to go down and see the optimal choice that you make. You want to see the choice that you in the order that you make until you run out of money. And I think, boy, if I'm looking at that, I'm wondering, did I mean if I meant that to be 200? I wonder if I'm trying to, let me check that. Because I'm looking at that, the numbers, I thought the numbers were more round than that. Let me check that again. But at any rate, the point is you're going to get down, and you're going to, when you're getting down to the end of your money, you're going to figure out which one, and it should be, it may or may not be exact, but it's going to be, if you're buying a lot of stuff and in small numbers, then they're going to marginal, the utility per yen is the same. In equilibrium, so there's an equilibrium, that's where you're optimizing. So that's what you'll want to find out. What's your optimum choice, given your constraint of income constraint and the diminishing marginal utility. What's your consumption pattern? That's what you want to think about here. What's your consumption pattern? And if you think about it, this is just an example, but you can think about how you consume other goods. And you always have choices. You always have choices, as to what you drink, what you eat, where you go to a restaurant, maybe what movie you see, what movie you see over again, what friends you visit, the number of times you take a cab as opposed to taking the train. All of these choices, and it's affected by time and money. So everything, you have constraints, you get satisfaction, some satisfaction out of doing things. If you don't do it. We get satisfaction out of the things that we do, that's why we do things, and it has a cost. It costs, so the choices that we make, we're trying to think about what we have, the choices we have, the resources we have to do that, and basically because more is better, we want to do the best we can. We want to find that combination of choices. So that's true whether it's beer or wine, whether it's Italian restaurants and Thai restaurants, or as I said, bento boxes and trips to Antarctica. There's so many bento boxes. If you're going to make a trip to Antarctica, how many bento boxes? There's some optimal mix of trips to Antarctica and bento boxes that you're going to consume. And what it means is that there's any two goods. So you can come up with a silly example, but the silly example just shows you that it really is any two goods, and you consume until the marginal benefit that you get from consuming one is the same as the other. That's your optimal. That's your behaving optimally. And that's what we think. We think people in general behave optimally. Let me go back and just make sure. If I made a mistake, I'm wondering if that was supposed to be 200. I'll check on that. Oh, and you were talking about the last question. That wasn't the last question. Was that the last question? Yeah. Okay. Where am I looking? I'm looking at the next week. Right. Okay. 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 Now I'm going to let me start the lecture. I'm going to talk today. I'm going to talk about the labor supply. I want to talk about the margin. I want you to understand what the margin is and what it means. It's a very, very important concept. And we're going to make an introduction to perfect competition. And I promise you, and I've been promising myself, that next week I'm going to have a picture of what we call bright. There's an English term called bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Has anybody ever heard of the term bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? And what it is supposed to be squirrels. Squirrels have a bushy tail, and they're bright-eyed, and they're supposed to be wide awake and paying attention in class. I'm going to have that so that those of you that struggle with sleep after lunch here, that to inspire you to try to stay awake through my lecture. I know it's not easy because it's right after lunch, and I'd be falling asleep too if I was out there. So I don't blame you. At any rate, I'm going to talk first about labor supply, but before I do that, I'm going to talk about something. You say, why is this guy talking about this? I'm going to talk about quantum electrodynamics, and the reason is not that I'm here to talk to you about physics and all, but what what I want to talk to you about is mathematics, and I want you to understand that the use of mathematics, how we use mathematics to understand reality. Because a lot of times people think, well, it's just numbers and it doesn't really mean anything. And the point is that mathematics, there's a reason why we use mathematics in an economic analysis. Because we're talking about reality, we're describing reality, and mathematics the amazing thing about mathematics is that we know that we can really talk about reality when we build models. And the best example of that is quantum electrodynamics. And that's the study of interactions between electrically charged subatomic particles that take place due to the transfer of photons between those subatomic particles. The amazing thing about this field is it's considered one of the most accurate physical theories ever created. It's an incredible theory of quantum mechanics, because based on the theory, these have been proven accurate to 10 parts in a billion. You're getting the theoretical predictions they maybe predict something that's 100 million, and tests are showing that the prediction is accurate within that. That's the prediction, and the tests are showing something that close. It's 1 part in 100 million. It's astonishing. The astonishing thing about it is that, and what it is, and here's an example. And this fellow, Dr. Kinoshita, he's a Japanese American. He's actually now in his 90s. That's a picture in his late 80s. I hope he looks pretty good there. I hope I'm looking that good I hope I'm around then, and I hope I look that good then. But this guy has done. This guy's literally thousands and thousands of pages of calculations. Absolutely thousands. Amazing. He's one of the very, very in terms of that kind of the discipline and the use of mathematics in order to calculate. This is an example from his this book that he edited. An example of just a page. This is like thousands of pages of these calculations in order to study the behavior. But the point is that these calculations are how accurate that they are. We can understand reality. And so when I talk about models, if you do a model correct, if you do something in your model, and you're modeling human behavior, where you're doing something that captures the nature of how people behave, you can say something important about it, predict how people will behave. And that's the point here, is that models can help us to understand reality. Mathematics can help us. That's why we use it. We don't use it just to, it's not so it can look complicated or so that people don't understand. Some people do that, but really good mathematical models actually help us to understand reality very clearly. And that's true not just in physics, but it's true in economics. And I'm going to present a very simple model here of the labor, of the choice of labor and leisure that I think will, and it's just something I came up and said, well, let me try to do this in a very simple way to help you understand the choice that people make between labor and leisure. And I think it does provide some insight into human behavior. We've talked about the willingness to work, that is the household labor supply. It should be upward sloping. It's the law of supply. The law of supply says that as the price of something goes up, in this case the wage goes up, the willingness to work increases. If you pay more, you're willing to work more. That's kind of a natural thing. That's and at the same time, households choose the amount of work that maximizes household utility. And the thing about that is that leisure is also a good. Leisure is also a good. So the time that you don't work is a good. So the more that you don't work, there's also an amount of happiness when you're able to do things other than work. So there's a trade-off. You can see right away when we need money, we have to work to get income one way or another to live. But on the other hand, we also want some time off. We need time off. We need to sleep. We need to sleep. We have other activities, social activities, other activities that we do. It isn't just work. And what's the balance? How do people make those choices? That's what we want to think about. As I said, the amount of leisure we experience is measured in the time we spend in leisure activities and the consumptions of goods. The consumption of goods, and that it's a leisure activity. So if we're consuming goods and spending time that we're not working, that's all a leisure. That's a leisure activity. But remember, leisure also means things like raising children. That's leisure. In other words, we're not working, although it really is work. It's an intense work. And I can tell you, having the father of 3 children, that it's an enormous amount of work. But we economists, we talk about that as being leisure. But that is a little bit silly in a way, but that's the way we call it. Demand is downward sloping for leisure. It's, for most people, a normal good. Our income increases, our demand increases for leisure. Labor and leisure are substitutes, and the opportunity cost of an hour of leisure is the wage given up from an hour of work. And the opportunity cost of work is the value of the leisure time given up. And that's here, this shows some trade-off between labor and this is just pure time. We're somewhere along the line, this line in terms of labor and leisure. 24 hours of work, 0 leisure. 21 hours of work, 3 hours of leisure. Pretty much you need sleep, so people really can't do much. People need typically a minimum of 6 hours of sleep. So that's kind of the minimum. But this is your combination, 12 and 12. You see everything along the blue line adds up to 24. So that's our choices, our trade-off, and the opportunity cost of an hour of leisure here is the wage times 15 hours. That's the value of the wage for working 15 hours. So that's the basic trade-off. But it's kind of, I find it difficult. This is the 3rd year I've taught this class, and trying to really describe it well it's been one of the harder things for me to. I find the teaching about labor a bit difficult. And one of the things I wanted to do first, I wanted to make this chart, and this shows the demand curves for leisure, the supply curves for labor, along this indifference, where it adds up to 24. The possible hour combination. What I'm saying here, at this point L, that's a minimum. You have to have 6 hours of leisure. That's the assumption here. Here you have 6 hours of leisure. Here's the possibilities, the mix of leisure and labor. Here are some possibilities. Here's an example. this is a steeper upward slope. Work is preferred to leisure. So here in this line, this person would be work 15 hours a day and have 9 hours of leisure. Here it's somewhere in between, 9 hours of labor, 15 hours of leisure. And here's someone who really wants to lead a lot of leisure time, and there may be different reasons. Maybe they're a mother raising children, or an elderly person that doesn't need to work much. There's a lot of reasons to be here. Typically, if you're a younger person, you're probably going to be more here. You have more energy, more desire to work, more need to build your career, so you might be here. Older person or someone taking care of children, you might be more in that line. So that gives at least some idea of the trade-off between labor and leisure. But the problem is it doesn't tell us much about how we make the choice. This doesn't tell us how, in fact, we make these choices between labor and leisure. So then what I wanted to do, in order to do that, I wanted to come up with a model that was simple enough and yet captured enough of the reality, the potential reality of the trade-off between labor and leisure, so I could take a mathematical model, but it's simple enough, something that you can follow, you can understand, it won't be too intimidating, and it has a chance at telling us something interesting about that trade-off. And so I'm going to go through that, and what I want you to do, the first thing is, please, whenever I present a model, try not to be intimidated by this. Don't look at that, oh my God, he's taught, oh, I can't follow this, I can't deal with this, he's talking about mathematics. Calm down, we're going to go this step by step, very carefully. You'll see that this is just these are reasonable kinds of assumptions we're making. They're going to be in line with assumptions that we've made about human behavior. You'll see that. And we'll get some interesting results. The model will tell us something interesting about the trade-off between labor and leisure. So let's go. We'll start out with, we're going to assume that there's a composite good. And composite good, this is a concept when we say a composite good. That's where we're not really concerned about what good we're consuming. We just kind of put them all together in one basket, call it a blob of goods. All the goods we consume is a composite. It's just putting all the goods in one basket, calling it a single good, and we'll call that C for composite. So that's a composite. So we'll say that the household receives utility from consuming a composite good. So the utility, if we write that as in mathematical terms, the utility U is some function is created by consuming the good C. That's the utility is a function of the consumption of C. That's all that means. Nothing really complicated. Just keep that in mind, and you won't get lost. So the utility it receives from consuming C depends upon the amount of leisure time and the income. So we'll call leisure time this hour. That's H for hour. We'll put a little E, leisure for E. I chose the letter E. So that's HE, that's leisure. That's leisure time. That's in hours. Okay. And income. The more money we have, the more. So that means that the amount of C that we can consume increases. So the utility we receive from consuming C depends upon the amount of leisure time and income. Income I. It's the amount of money we have, the amount of income we earn, and the amount of leisure time we have. So what we're going to say is that there's some combination. There's some combination. So C is some combination of leisure time and income. So C is a function. It's we consume C by mixing leisure time and income. You go out to dinner. You're spending leisure time and you spend money. Most things that you do require both money and time. Most things that you do require at least some money. There's a few things that you do that don't cost much money, but most things cost at least some money. And the consumption of things in general requires both a mixture of time and money. Seems reasonable enough, nothing, that seems to be something normal. I think people can relate, that's a normal experience. Now, we're also going to say that the demand curves for leisure time and income are downward sloping. We've talked about the demand for things being downward sloping. That means the more leisure time that we have downward sloping, that implies diminishing marginal utility. We've talked a lot about diminishing marginal utility, so this should make sense to you by now. The more leisure, we want more leisure time, but the more we have, the less satisfaction we get out of it. And the same thing in income, and also the income is downward, the demand curve for income is downward sloping. The happiness that we get out of having more money by itself is downward sloping. Let's say if I've got 10,000 yen and I have a certain amount of happiness and I get another 10,000 yen, I'm probably not twice as happy. I'm happier, I got more money, but I'm probably not twice as happy. So what we're saying is that there's going to be diminishing marginal return for our demand for money. We have a demand to earn it, we need it, so we have a demand for it. That's what I'm saying here. So the marginal value of either money or income or leisure time decreases with increasing amounts of leisure time and income. But what's interesting is the income the household earns depends upon the wage rate and the time spent working. The time spent working is also H, but it's H of K. H, K for work. All right. And you can see, well, there's a time constraint. It's a very simple time constraint. HE, how many hours in a day is 24? HE, which is leisure, plus the time spent working. Labor equals 24. Nothing magical about that either. These are all assumptions that just, by now, you have some idea of these assumptions. These are basic assumptions that we're making that by now in the class should be natural to you. So these are we're just taking the ideas, and we're putting them into a numerical form. We're going to make a model. We're going to make a model, and then we're going to see what does it tell us about reality. That's our purpose here. So now, I'm going to take, so the amount I'm going to say, this is an assumption. What does this, the consumption of C, the units of C that we use income and time and leisure time to produce. So we're just saying that C equals the amount of time times the income. Just multiply it. I could make other assumptions. I could put an A times, I could, other assumptions. And also divide by the price. There's the price of the good. I've got to use income to consume it. I need time, and our demand for that is the price of the good. And then what we often do in economics, we often just say that this price of this composite good, we just set it equal to 1. That's just set it equal to 1. So because we don't care what the price of this is. We're not concerned. If we were going to study the price, we'd be concerned about the price. But we're not here. We're concerned about the choice of time. We're concerned how we use the time. So we just say, well, we just set it equal to 1, and we get that. So it simplifies it. Just makes it real simple, real easy. Just makes it a little bit easier. And that simplifies right there. C is the amount of leisure time times the income. We combine the two together. We take our money, we take our time, we go out and we buy things and consume them. And that's how we spend our leisure time. It takes us time to consume, and it takes us money. Time and money is how and we spend that, and think that's what you do in your leisure time. You spend your time and money to get, and the satisfaction that you get, and we call all the mix of all those goods together, we call that a composite good. So now we can describe, I'm going to describe the utility, because the utility is a function of C, but C is a function of time, of leisure time and income. So then utility, you can see then that utility itself is a function of leisure time and income. So utility is a function of leisure time and income. So now we're getting close. So now we can define, now what we're going to say. Now remember what we've said about, though, that the demand curves are downward sloping. Law of demand, diminishing marginal utility. How do we put that into a number? How do we make that into something that we can capture in a mathematical model? Well, what that means is that we have some, say for time, that part, if we just take time by itself, and we raise it to some power, say some power, call it alpha. I could call it Q, I could call it that, like what Prince did. See what Prince did, something like that. You know, you can call it whatever you want, but it's this to some power, and if it's downward sloping, it has to be less than 1. It has to be less than 1. Because if it's less than 1, a double, if we double the time, then our utility is less than double. That's what diminishing marginal utility means. That's what it means. It's that simple. It's that simple. That is what it means. It means that some power, you raise it to some power, the power that you would describe it by raising it to some power that's less than 1. And then you're saying that's exactly what diminishing marginal utility means. Diminishing marginal utility means I double the amount of leisure time that I have, and I'm not twice as happy. I'm not twice better off. That's what it means. So we know it's some number less than 1. Because we've assumed that it's downward sloping demand curves. That's how we take a downward sloping demand curve, we put it into a number. Now we've got a number, we can create a model. So that's how we use these concepts. These concepts we can take to turn into symbols, numbers, that we can then analyze into a model, into a mathematical model. And what I'm going to show you is that you will get an outcome that looks like reality. So we're actually describing something that has some bearing on reality. And that's the point. We wanted to create something that's simple, that gives us some insight, that may give us some insight, and we'll look at the results of the model. If the results of the model are such that it tells us something about reality, we say, well, we might have a good model there. Because the model tells us something. It can give us some insight. So we've got that, this alpha, and that income is a beta, because remember, the income is also downward sloping. Our demand curve for income is downward sloping. That means we double our income, we're not double twice, we're less than twice as happy. So we'll call that some beta. Again, we could call it B, we could call it C, we could call it whatever. But whatever that is, and let's call that beta, it's also less than 1. It has to be less than 1 also, because it's downward sloping. Diminishing marginal utility. It's exactly what it means. So, keep that in mind. As I say, and some of you will get a chance to find out what I said later today or tomorrow. So here's here we got. So our utility. Our utility is this function. And we're just saying we multiply it. And and we multiply something out like that. Why do we do that? Well, that says that you have to have both. You can't just have no leisure time and just get a pile of money. Because what do you do if you have if you have a billion, 100 billion yen, and you have no time? What do you do with it? You certainly. Why would you buy a Lamborghini? Why would you waste your money because you can't even use it? You could look at it, but you wouldn't even have time to look at it because that's leisure time. That's unless you drive it to. I guess you could drive it to work. I guess, but that would be some leisure time if you could do that and get some satisfaction. But the point is that we mix the two, which means we have to have non-negative. We need some money and we need some time. If we have no time, then we have no utility. If we have no money, we have no utility. That's the point. We have to go out and earn some money, but we have to leave some time. And we're limited by time because there's only 24 hours a day. We only have 24 hours. Everybody has that constraint. I don't care who you are, how much money you have, whatever it is, whether you, me, and everyone else on this planet has that constraint. The same constraint, 24 hours a day. And we have to make those same choices between work and leisure. So, as I've said, diminishing marginal utility in both leisure time and income, then the following must be true. As I said, alpha is less than 1 and beta is less than 1. Both of them are less than 1. That tells us diminishing marginal utility. It tells us that demand curves are downward sloping. Now what I'm going to do, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to say that if we mix the two together and we double both, that will double our utility. Now that may or may not be true. If we have double the time and double the income, that will get double the utility. Now we'll see that there's a certain quality that assumption makes. We'll see that later. I won't go into any detail. Just we'll make that assumption now, just to keep it simple. And so what that means is that the amount of utility doubles with the doubling of both leisure and income, so that alpha plus beta equals 1. If alpha plus beta, if alpha, utility, see if alpha beta, alpha plus beta equals 1, and that achieves it. That does that. Okay, but don't worry about that. That's not really important. That's just to keep it simple. But it's not a particularly important. It's not a necessary. We don't have to make that assumption. Now, what's interesting about that is that what that does mean, though, and what this is interesting, it actually does say something interesting. Because even if this is 1, even if we can double our utility by doubling both our time and income, what do we ultimately run out of? We run out of time. We run out of time. There's only so much time. We can make a lot of money. And I assure you, we make lots and lots more money here than do people in Zimbabwe or Mali. We make lots more money. But the point there is that we might be happier, but we're probably not, if we have 100 times the income, we're probably not 100 times happy. Probably not 100 times happy. And that's the point, so that even if this is equals to 1, the reality is we can't really double time much. We can double our income, we can triple our income, we're going to run out of time pretty quick. So quite quickly we will run out of time. When we run out of time, then we increase our income, and that's downward slope, so our utility doesn't decrease, so our total utility is going to decrease. So you're going to have diminishing marginal utility ultimately. So that means if a society, what we're saying is if a society gets more wealthy, people are happier, but if they have double the income, they're usually not twice as happy. That's probably true. I would say people are happier here than they are probably in the Congo, but they might not be. It's not like we're what we would say deliriously happy. But at any rate, so this is our utility function. This is our utility function, and you can see. I've gone through this very carefully. You look at this very carefully. It shouldn't be that. It shouldn't see. It's not very. It's actually quite simple. It seems reasonable, and if you follow the logic very carefully, it should be obvious what's going on. It should be fairly obvious, unless you've been napping. So here is but we also, since more is better, we want more utility. We want more happiness. We want to be as happy as we can. The household wants to do as well as possible. The goal of the household is to maximize utility, to maximize this. But there are constraints. Remember, again, if there's no constraints on it, if we could get an infinite amount of income, there's nothing to maximize. There's nothing to maximize, but we know we can only earn so much income because there's only so many hours in the day to work. And wages are not infinite. Can't get infinite wages. There's some non-infinite wage. You know, unless you run a hedge fund or something. You know, but and they make money, the amounts of money that are basically infinite, as far as I'm concerned. But so that's your income, the wage times the hours worked. That's a constraint. That's a limit. You're limited by that. You're also limited by the number of hours in the day. So those are limits. And the thing is, we can see this is this HK. That's a choice. So we choose the amount of leisure and our income. But income is a function of wage and hours worked. So we substitute I, income, into this equation. We substitute income, the I into here, and we get, now we have a function, a utility function, that's in terms of the time that's spent in leisure and the time spent working. So now we're reducing our variables. So that's one of the strategies that we do when we do analysis, we analyze models. So we want to reduce the number of variables that we have to select, and the more that we can reduce that through our constraints, the simpler the model is to analyze. So that's what my strategy here is. I want to make a very simple model, but something that says some interesting things. I'll find out later. So we maximize utility, subject to these constraints. We substitute the income constraint into the household utility function to give us the utility function as a function of the hours spent working and the hours spent in leisure and the wage rate. So now we have that. Wage times hours worked to the raised to the beta. Remember, this is the same substituting for I. So now we have the equation in terms of hours worked, hours leisure, hours worked, and the wage. But the wage, we don't choose our wage. So remember that it's a function of the wage, but we don't choose that. And then we can substitute the time constraint, because this is for leisure and labor. We can put the time constraint in terms of one or the other variable. In this case, we'll substitute for work, and we can give the utility function as a function of the amount of leisure time and the wage rate, which means now we figure out what's the amount of work or amount of leisure time that we need to maximize utility. We just choose that. So it makes it very simple. Now this is still a little bit of a complicated problem because it's a little bit. So I'm not going to do a mathematical analysis. What I'm instead going to do is I'm going to do something called a simulation. And the great thing about simulation, let me write that down. It's a very important word. And there's a lot of work that that's done, economics and other fields, where you build models and then you run simulations. And that's a simulation. We're going to run a simulation. We're going to simulate different values. And those values, and since we can simulate, what we're going to simulate are different values of leisure. We can simulate how, because the only value that the household chooses now, we've set up the model, so the only choice, we now just choose the amount of leisure. So we see how does our utility vary with our changes in leisure. So that's what we're going to do. So it's different values. So our choice is different values of leisure. In other words, that is the value of it's HE. So we choose HE, the number of hours, and alpha. And we can choose the alpha. What is our value of alpha and beta? Because those tell us how we value work and leisure. So alpha tells us how important leisure is to us, and HE tells us how much leisure time we want. This is how much we value it. The bigger the value, the closer to 1. The closer to 1, the more we value leisure. The lower the value, the closer to 0, the less value we put on leisure, and the more value. If we put less value on leisure, what's the opportunity cost of leisure? Work. That's the opportunity cost of leisure is work. So that means if we make this lower, because remember, alpha plus beta equals 1. That's our assumption. If we make this value lower, then we make this value larger. If that's smaller, that becomes larger. Okay. So then what happens, we're now thinking about, what we're now thinking about is we're creating a model that tells you the relative value that we put on leisure and work. So if we have different values of leisure and work, so what we're doing, we're going to make a simulation of different values for leisure and work, and we're going to see the amount of utility, the amount of utility produced. How the utility changes. And one of the things we're going to see is where, because the important thing is not to get the most utility in overall, it's based on how you value leisure as to how much you work. Because then the utility and the utility that you earn. So the utility that you experience. So that's what we're going to do here. And so what I'm going to do is, I ran the simulation for values of alpha between 0.8 and 0.2. Low value of alpha means low value of leisure. People that don't value leisure very much, who want to work, who get a lot of satisfaction out of working, who want to make a lot of money, but they still have to have some time. And basically what they do is they don't spend much time in leisure, but they spend a lot of money. They blow a lot of money when those are people that don't have a lot of time to spend, but when they do, they spend a lot of money. And so that's how they get happiness. And I know people like that. They may not have a lot of time, but boy, they have plenty of money. Some of us have more time and less money. Now, so I ran that. It's very simple. If you take that, you run this in Excel. It's a very simple model. Wouldn't take more than a few minutes to run this. And here's the results. Here's the results, and this is for each preference, more preference for leisure, 0.8. More, and then diminishing preference for leisure, that means more preference for work, as people want to work more. And then we've got, this is total utility. This is time in hours, this is leisure time, as leisure time increases. 24. Remember, if they spend all your time in leisure, you don't get any utility because they don't have any money. That's the point here. You gotta do some work. And then in red, I highlight the points for each of these values, which maximizes utility. And so for the person with this value, that values leisure in this way, that says this is the number of hours of leisure they'll choose. And if they value leisure in this manner, here they have more of a preference for leisure, then here they'll work 14 hours. They'll have 14 hours of leisure and 10 hours of work. Here they love more leisure. They'll work 17 hours of leisure, 7 hours of work. And here they hardly want to work at all. They got 19 hours of leisure and 5 hours of work. Okay. Now what's interesting, you'll note the amount of leisure increases. I'm sorry, the amount of utility. This is total utility. And you'll see that the person that works, they get the most utility. They're working a lot of hours. So this is somebody who doesn't get much leisure. They go out and they're making a ton of money, and they're working a lot of hours, but they got a lot of money to spend, so they're really happy. So they get a lot of happiness. Now you'd say, well, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, this is the point, people are different. People aren't the same. And they're not the same, they have different preferences. And for example, let's look at here. That's kind of low amount of utility, you would think. But remember, if this person has a very high preference for leisure, they're just hanging out. This describes a what you would call traditional societies, very traditional societies that say even pre-agricultural, hunter-gatherer societies where people live in tribes, in small groups, and in fact, this is how they behave. Such people that live in nomadic societies, in small groups, small tribes, they don't spend their time working. They don't work very much at all. They hardly work. In fact, they hardly work. They spend a little bit of time getting what they need. It's out there in the jungle or the forest or whatever. They gather the food. They go shoot a rabbit or two, and collect some vegetables, and, wild vegetables, and then they have a little feast, and then they hang out and they talk. That's what people in traditional societies do. So for us, we would say, well, they don't get much utility. Yeah, but for them, they get as much as they want. This is all they want. They're happy. That's as much happy for them for that preference. If they have that preference for time, for leisure time, then their utility, because what they consume isn't very much, but they consume what they need, and they spend a lot of time with their family and friends, so they're happy. This is as happy as they're going to get. That's the point. That's a kind of society. So what we're talking about, this table that we just pulled a bunch of numbers, and as it said, well, what does any of that mean? Well, it means something. Because what I did was I took something that had an idea that made sense. Took an idea that made sense. It wasn't very complicated, but it made logical sense. So I created a model that had logical sense, and I was able to build this. I was able to come up with something that kind of made me make some sense. Now let's look at the other end. There's boy, they're gonna work a lot. They're working a lot. So they're working 19 hours a day, hardly getting any sleep. They're getting a couple hours of sleep a night. But when they're off, they're doing it. They're living it up. They're going to be going to the most expensive restaurants. They're going to be driving the hottest sports cars, and they're going to be doing whatever else that makes them happy, blowing money when they're when they're not working. So they're getting a lot, at least numerically, a lot of happiness. Now the thing is, we said that these people live with this preference, live in a kind of rural, not even a rural, nomadic, pre-agricultural society. These are people who live in the center of Tokyo, Midtown Manhattan, Manhattan, Tokyo, and central London. That's the lives that they lead. That's a preference for work. And part of that is also, if you live in that environment creates pressures. That environment itself creates pressures. The urban environment creates pressures. The thing is, if you live in this city, well, you've got pressure. You've got some pressure. You got to make some money. And the reason is that everybody's compacting, they're getting close together. There's a lot of competition for space. There's a lot of people that want to get as close as possible to the center of the city, and they're bidding up the cost of space. So you got to make money. So the only way you can live there is to work a lot. So that's part of it as well. So your trade-off, you get a preference for more work. You get more work, but you also get a preference to spend your money on the stuff to make it worth it. Because you're not going to be working 20 hours a day so you can just come home and and eat cup of noodle. You're not going to do that. You know, you're going to be spending that money. That's what people, just look around. Look at the people that work for the investment bank. You go to work for an investment bank, I assure you, you're going to be working 20 hours a day. And boy, when you're not working, you're going to be hard playing. You're going to be partying. And when you're still in your 20s and early 30s, that's what most of those guys do. I know, because I've known a lot of those guys in my career. You know, so if you don't want to do that, you better not become an investment banker. So that's at that end. And here it's all in between. It's various aspects. You know, somebody who wants to live in central London, Minato-ku in Tokyo, Manhattan, places like that. Maybe suburban Tokyo, you know, Brooklyn, suburbs, small town, small, you know, mid-sized town, smaller town, rural area, you know.
The island.
You know, do you know that?
Small island.
Yeah, so that's, yeah, so it's that kind of, so that tells us something. You can see that at least it describes something. We get an insight. Well, that's why people, then you say, well, why do people live in central Tokyo? They seem to have that lifestyle. That's exactly why. They don't have much time, and so when they do, they got lots of money. And that's exactly why. Because that's their preference, and they spend their time and their money in that way. That's exactly why. And people down here, you say, why do they do that? They have a different preference. And they're happy too. Those people are also happy. You know, to the extent that they can do that, and the extent that these people can do that, both ends are happy. The numbers are different. This looks like they're a lot happier. But, you know, that it's all relative. These people probably think that these people aren't very happy. And these people think those people aren't very happy. Well, God bless all of them. You know, that's it. You know, people seem to get to find their own place. And this tells us something about, well, how they do it and why. Why they live, maybe the town, the size of the town that they live, the choices they make in terms of work and leisure. It kind of tells us something. But that was a very simple model. But that's the point. The point is it can tell us some very interesting things about reality. In the same way that, and as I say, it's all about modeling something carefully. It's about creating a careful model, thinking clearly about what you do. Just like with this guy, Dr. Kinoshita. That guy, thousands of pages, and he's talking about reality. So we're talking about reality too. We're talking about a different kind of behavioral reality, the reality of human beings and their choice of work and leisure. But we can build a model that it tells us something. It's not just a bunch of numbers, and it makes, when you look at it, it kind of makes sense. And we can kind of explain, and it helps us to think about the world as we see it. And that's what a lot of modeling in economics is all about, and why we use mathematics in economics. So what I want you to do is not be afraid of that. Unless I'm going to present you with simple mathematical models, don't be afraid. Just look carefully, understand what's going on. It's not rocket science. It's not quantum mechanics. It's pretty simple basic mathematics, and it can tell us a lot about how the world works. Now I just want to talk about some choices also that, in terms of income and the choice of having a family. And what's interesting is we can use this to think about think about the what happens in terms of having a family. And the thing is that, say if you have children, certainly children are expensive, certainly there's a lot of work, but there's also a lot of satisfaction. People who generally have children, you do get a lot of satisfaction out of raising children. So we may say that the demand for children is upward sloping with income. Because the more income we have, the more that we can afford to pay for children. So we might say that the demand curve for children with regard to wages, with regard to income, as our income increases, we should be willing to we want to demand more children. Okay, so that makes sense. That's kind of income effect. Is leisure is a normal good. If the wage increase, raising children is leisure. The more income, then the amount of leisure demanded increases, and part of that demand is perhaps for more children. Okay. So we would expect this kind of relationship. But what's interesting, we look at the real world, and this is part of it, the real world is more complicated. The number of children in a family actually appears to decrease with income. And that's when you look in terms of place. That's not controlling for place. That is when you consider, when you look at the data for a particular place. And what I've done here is I've collected data on, that was fertility rates for women of childbearing ages by prefecture. And I looked at prefectural average income. So you would think that as average income goes up, that the number of children per household would also increase, and the opposite happens. The opposite happens, that the more the lowest income, which is Okinawa prefecture, has the highest fertility rate, and the highest income, Tokyo, has the lowest fertility rate. So Tokyo, with the most money, people have the most money, but there's the lowest fertility. So it's exactly the opposite of what you would expect, at least if you were considering just in terms of income. So there's something else going on. So the point here is that this is where we have to see, quite often when we go out in the real world and we get data, we may have a theory, we have a theory here, and we want to test it. Well, is raising children a normal good? If so, well then if incomes go up, then the number of children should go up. But at least if you look overall by prefecture, it's not. Now, what you would also need to do is you would also have to control. You need to control for income, and by prefecture. So you'd have to get another variable that said income within a prefecture, and then I suspect it might be the case that would be the case. But at least in terms of average income, the more wealthy the place, the less children. So why is that? Well, then you have to say, well, what's going on there? Why is the fertility rate lower? Well, one reason, then you have to think about what goes on in a place like Tokyo. What goes on here? Well, one, there's a lot of there's a higher opportunity cost. Let's say if you're living out in a place like Kagoshima. It's a nice place. I've been there a few times. A lovely place. Very pleasant place. Quiet. There's not a lot to do. You watch the volcano erupt. It does that all the time. But it's a beautiful place. But there's not a lot to do. We've got a lot of time to raise children. There's not a lot of other things to do. You do your work. You enjoy time with your family. It's a simpler life. So the opportunity cost is actually higher, is lower for doing other things. It's a lower opportunity cost. So it can make sense. We're in Tokyo here. There's all these other things to do. You've got work. You've got social life. You have your social life. Your friends. Your whatever. Cultural scene. All that whatever kind of things that keep because you live. That's why you live in a place like this. You live because you're busy. You want to live in a place like this because you're doing a lot of stuff generally. That's why you live here. So that means that your opportunity cost is actually higher because you have all these other things that you can do here. So that affects your willingness and desire to have children, because children take up time. If you're going to take up that time, you might as well be in a place, if you have the money, you might as well just be in a place like a Kagoshima. That's a really pleasant place, it's a beautiful place, it's a very pleasant place to live. Well, why not just live there? So that's part of that choice. What are other opportunities? And also, the other thing is, and this is a very important point, what's the cost of raising children here is so much higher. Some of you may have gone to private schools. That may have been part of your growing up. I know we're foreigners, we send our children to private schools. Some foreigners send their children to Japanese schools, we send them to private schools. To do that in Tokyo is expensive. But if you go into a private, that's very expensive. You've got also, there's a lot more, parents are competitive, so there's all that kind of stuff going on, all that silly stuff going on. They want, so they put their children in the most expensive schools and tell them to work hard and da-da-da-da. So eventually you come to university and have fun. So, so it's expensive. Raising children in big cities is really expensive. So you can't afford to have, how many mothers you see going by with 3 children, 2 children, much less 3. I see once in a while, I actually saw a mother the other day on a bike with 3 children. That was pretty good. You don't see that very often. Not very, maybe, sometimes you'll see 2, usually 1. Usually 1. Sometimes 2. But not, especially like a place like Minato, you're not going to see more than 1 most of the time. Not going to see more than 1 most of the time. You're walking around here. So what are the opportunity costs? Let's look at the opportunity costs associated with having children. Well, one, the work opportunities. Let's say if you're a woman here in Tokyo, there's more career opportunities. You have more career opportunities. You're going to live. You have to make more money anyway. So the people that you're probably going to be more ambitious, and there's more opportunities. So if there's more income opportunities, if you're a woman here, well then that affects your opportunity cost. That's your opportunity cost of having children. You have to give up income. You might have to give up a lot of income. So that means there's more career opportunities, higher opportunity costs. So that's one reason to have children. Another is consuming other leisure activities, holidays, restaurants, cultural activities. There's all kinds of things to do. You see people spend all their time, a lot of time. All you got to do is run around this city in the afternoon and go to some place and watch. If you've done this, go to some place. You go in and there's women and probably their husbands are at work making money, and they've got nothing. They're hanging around and sipping tea and drinking coffee and eating cake and spending money, and not having kids kind of makes that a little bit easier. And we'll see a little bit later in the class. I think we'll talk. I think next semester I'll show you how that actually women in Tokyo, believe it or not, women here actually tend to work less than in smaller towns and rural areas. They actually work less. So that the participation rate in the labor force is actually lower. And the reason is that there's a lot of leisure time. It's because women there's a certain class of women that are out spending their husband's money. That's it. That's what they do. And as I say, they seem pretty happy doing it. I'm not going to tell them they can't do it. That's their business. And if I'm running a business and they're spending their money, that makes me even happier. They can come and spend all the time and money they want there. If I'm running the restaurant and they're hanging out. That's what happens. So those are and those opportunities are also opportunities that are less in a smaller town. So so as I've said, and the other reason is the cost of living, general cost of living. And if you take the fertility rate and what I did with housing cost is probably what we call proxy. It's a very good proxy. Is a variable. I'll write this down because this is an important word to know. An important word in economics is a proxy. In other words, this can stand in for a lot of things. For example, housing cost or land cost can be a proxy, can substitute for cost of living. So it's a simple variable that's easy to get. It's like a proxy is a simple variable, easy to get, that can tell us a lot about something else that may be harder to get information on. We call it a proxy. So land prices are a good proxy for housing costs, since land cost data is readily available, and since prefectural averages from this data can be easily calculated. That's very easy to get. And I've used this for if you've ever heard of the Chikakoji. The Chikakoji is it's the official government land price. It's put out twice a year. I'm trying to remember if it's once or twice, but it's twice a year, July and January. And it's by various places in survey the land. It's very important if you're in the real estate business, but it's also, it's something that tells you about the cost, the value of land in various locations. It's very easy to get. You just get this cheap code, you can get it right there. They update it every year. It's updated. It's very easy to get the averages. It just takes a few minutes. So that's what I did. When I got that, I got the fertility rate, my pre-picture. I got the official, the average residential price in pre-picture, and you get it down to the same, that relationship. You get that relationship, the fertility rates increase with the decreasing land price. So it probably has to do, if anything, I talked about all this other stuff, but probably more than anything else, it's just simply the cost of living. Cost of living in Tokyo is so high, it's so expensive, for housing is so expensive, land is so much more expensive, and it means your living space is small, your land, the cost is high, there's no place to have children. It's too, and the schools are very expensive. There's no place to have there's no parks for them to play in. There's no place, it's expensive for the schools. A lot of reasons not to have a lot of children here. So that's probably, so when you look at all the reasons, it's probably the cost of living. Cost of living is probably the greatest factor. Now I'm going to move from labor. We've got about 13 minutes left. I'll talk a little bit about the margin, and then I'm going to introduce the firm and perfect competition. So I'll begin talking about that. I don't think I'm going to get very far into that, but we'll just get a quick introduction of that before the end of the lecture. But now I want to talk about margin. And the reason here is that I want you to understand the importance of the margin. And if you've slept through this class, please watch later so you can understand this, and so that this is an important concept in economics. And so what takes place on the margin is important not only in economics, but mathematics, physics, a lot of fields we look at behavior, activity on some margin. So when we're talking about the margin in economics, we're talking about change, how things change with the change within and across economic variables. So we're talking about what's marginal utility. How does utility change with the change in the amount of goods, the number of goods that we consume? What's the elasticity? We've talked about elasticity. Elasticity is demand and supply elasticity. That's the percentage change in the quantity supplied as a percentage change of some price or some price-related variable. So we're talking just how things change when something changes, how things respond, how they respond in the air around that. When something changes, what's the immediate response in that area? Not some average, but some response that's right with a little change. We're always interested in how does something change with a small change in a variable. If we're demand and supply curves, we're interested in what's the change in the quantity demanded or supplied. So with a small change in price, we get a small change in price, how does that change demand or supply? That's at the margin. Demand and supply elasticity, it's the ratio of the average, we described that. Cross-price elasticity, that's another one. These are all, and what my point here is that you look at all of these are all actually talking about behavior at the margin. We're seeing how people respond at the margin. Cross-price elasticity, it's the percentage change in the quantity demanded of a good with the percentage change in the price of another good. It's a response. So remember, when we talk about margin, this is a very, very, very important word in economics. That's very important. You want to write that down, you want to remember that word. Every time you do something, you want to think about that you're doing margin. We're examining behavior at the margin, how behavior changes with some small change. It's marginal behavior, margin. And we do that almost everything that we do in economics. Every kind of analysis is ultimately involved with studying the margin, not the average. And I remember way back when, I don't know, a long time ago, more than 30 years ago, I was in an undergraduate class in the US. In fact, it was like a class like this, 101 class. And I remember some guy was arguing about the average versus the margin. He couldn't understand, he couldn't get it. He kept on arguing, why isn't it the average? And he just wouldn't shut up about it. This is America, people talk. You guys never talk, but that's okay. It gives me I like to talk, so I don't have to shut up. But there, the people like to talk, and the guy just wouldn't talk, you know, and I wanted to hit him on the head because he just didn't get it. And you could just see the guy, he figured it had to be the average. You were worried about the average because your profit was the average, and he couldn't understand that the choices were all at the margin. He couldn't get it. He just couldn't get it. I want you to get that. I want you to understand that we're talking about, especially if you go to school in the US and you hear silly people arguing like that, you'll at least know that you understand this better than them. Now, as I say, we're always talking about the margin. Every one of these, this is all elasticity of labor, the percentage change in the quantity of labor supplied by the percentage change in the price of labor. One of the most important, marginal utility. It's the change in utility with the unit change in the consumption of the good. It's always about margin. So keep that in mind. And whenever we're doing analysis, it's almost always about the margin. And it's not just in this field, it's across scientific endeavors. And this is a part of that. That's a part where this is the science. And that's what we're interested in and why we're interested in it. Now we just have a few more minutes, and I'm going to talk, just to open up the discussion on 8 more minutes, on perfect competition and production functions. And this I don't have that prepared today, but I'm going to bring the ants into the discussion here, and you'll see why. But when we're talking about perfect competition, what we're talking about is kind of your basic kind of form of market, and of firms operating in a very basic market is what's called perfect competition. We'll see what that is, and we're going to learn. We've talked a little bit about the firm already. We're going to now go into, we're going to move away from talking about the household, and now we're going to spend a lot of time, the next section of the class, talking about the firm, and talking about, and, you know, now I forgot to mention about the midterm tests. So I'll just introduce this topic, and then I'll just bring that up in terms of when the midterm test is going to be. But we basically have, there's something called industrial organization. And we're going to talk about, in this semester, we're going to focus on perfect competition. Industrial organization, the ways in which firms are organized into industries. That's what we mean by industrial organization, the way firms are organized into industries. And there are four forms of industrial organization. Perfect competition, many small firms producing identical product. Monopolistic competition, many firms producing similar but not identical products. Fascinating topic, but we're not going to talk about that right away. Oligopoly, small number of firms producing a product. And monopoly, a single firm that dominating and controlling the market. Those are the four broad basic forms of competition. We're going to focus for much of the rest of the semester in terms of when we talk about the firm, we're going to talk about perfectly competitive firms. Perfectly competitive firms, many small firms. That's the first thing, is it's a market where there are many small firms. Numerous, too many to count. Too many to count that any individual firm means nothing in the market. Let's just think about the ants. One ant dies and then the other ants don't even notice. You know, they just go on. One firm dies, nobody even cares. There's so many firms out there, and they're all and they're small. They're all small, but just a few employees, and There's just too numerous to count and with very small numbers of people. They produce identical product. That's what we assume. Basic assumption is that they produce an identical product. You can't tell them apart. They all grow wheat. They all grow the same wheat. They all grow the same kind of rice. They all produce the same, if they're producing cups of coffee, they all make exactly the same cup of coffee that they all sell for the same price. It's all, everything is the same. No firm affects the price of the product in their individual actions. That means, that's called a price statement. You don't have any power. It means there's a lack of power. Firms in that market don't have power. They have to take the conditions that are given. They have to accept the conditions that they're given. They're dominated by the market. The market dominates them. It's a little bit of that as well. There are no barriers to enter or exit. You can go out and just open up another coffee shop. They seem to open up all the time. Firms, but they maximize profits. They maximize profits. Now, let's see, I think I just have a few more minutes, and people are starting to wake up, so I thought that this would be a good time to there you are, yes. So now you're awake, and the important thing is you want to know what about the midterm test. Now, this is week 5, so typically I have the test after week 8. And the reason is I usually ask students, I say, when is your test? I think typically it'd be like 2 weeks. Your midterms are like 2 weeks from now. Is that, how many people are having midterms in 2 weeks? Two, okay, and I bet the other half are also having their midterm in 2 weeks too. They're just not telling me. So 3 weeks, 2 weeks, next week? Next. 7. 3 weeks. You have 3 in 3 weeks?
In 2 weeks and 3 weeks.
2 weeks, 3 tests. Okay, so and that's usually the way it is, and I ask people about that in advance.
I prefer June.
Yes?
So, the end of the May, I have the two midterm tests
Yes.
for the class.
Very
So,
good.
I prefer the June.
Okay, that would be, I think, 3 weeks.
3 weeks from now.
June 8th.
The first weeks of June, I think.
Yeah, the first, I will probably do it, and as I say, that usually, like, after
June
the,
8th is
Best.
best.
I'm getting the consent, and now I'm getting people to finally talk in class, and I
The
really am
second
happy
week
to
of
hear
June.
that. Now, let me just check my calendar. What is today? Today is the
18.
3 weeks, you're right, the 8th, because the after the 8th. That's right. So that should be fine. So yeah, we'll do 3 weeks, and I think that's June the 8th or so. Okay, great, okay. Yeah, so somewhere around that, and the way it'll work is, I typically give like 4 days, 96 hours. I usually send the test out at midnight. So some of you will be waiting up excitedly at midnight to get your test and get going and working on it over the weekend. So that's, see if we can remember that. And you'll have 4 days until, usually it's like Friday, I think, midnight Friday to midnight Monday.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. So it's like the 96 hours. And you'll get to, and because your weekend, what else do you have better to do than to spend the time working on a midterm exam? Other than that, what else do you have to do? Now also the point is that you won't, there's no study, you don't study for my exams. My exams are going to be, you're going to have problems, you're going to have to figure them out, it's open book, it's going to be an open book test, but it's not, it's an email, it's all email, it's nothing, I don't do in class. I do not do in class, I think it's a waste, I don't want to waste time on lecture time, and plus, I want people to learn something. The point is that you learn something when doing the exam. So it's going to be open book, but you have to work on your own, because you're on the honor system, you have to work on your own, you can't work with each other, you got to work on your own, and it's not, I have some tough questions. So it's going to take some time. Some people get a little bit, but you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something, but it's going to be based on what you've had. You're going to be able, and you can write me, Having a problem, just drop me a line, oh, I don't quite understand, explain this, that's okay. That's okay. So that's the way it works. So if you have a problem, I don't quite understand, I'll explain, I won't tell you the answer, but I'll do it so that make sure you understand it. So that's the way it works. So we're gonna have 3 weeks, and that's gonna be the time. Okay, great. Thank you.
終わって、で、
Got it.
メールで送ってくるから、次の日の夜で。
That was